TomoNews presents Strange Airline Travel Stories, Part 2.
Prayers and crying aboard US-bound flight as turbulence terrifies passengers. A flight from Korea to the US was diverted to Tokyo after violent turbulence injured 5 people so badly they needed medical attention. Food everywhere, plates, glassware, and the contents of a flipped beverage cart left the cabin looking like a $2 Thai brothel on a Sunday morning. For the 240 passengers and 15 crew aboard American Airlines Flight 280, this was the most terrifying flight of their lives. Screams, sobbing, and whispered prayers filled the cabin as the hand of God shook the plane like a heroin junkie shakes her baby.
I love my family. I love my family very much. Everybody, please.
The turbulence rocked the plane for nearly a full hour. One passenger reported seeing a flight attendant become airborne and smash into an exit sign above the seats.
Hit your head. Show me the bowl that hit your head. It broke.
The Boeing 777-200 took off from Seoul just after 6 p.m. on the 16th and was due to arrive at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport around 3 a.m. The pilot was forced to abort the original plan and land instead at Japan's Narita Airport. None of the injuries were life-threatening, and the passengers were transferred to another flight on Wednesday to complete their journey.
Woman stung by stowaway scorpion on LAX flight. Get ready to battle a new poisonous airborne threat, Samuel L. Jackson. An unidentified woman was stung by a scorpion aboard an Alaska Airlines flight from LA to Portland, Oregon, Saturday night. Airline officials are apparently unsure how the scorpion snuck aboard the aircraft, which originated in Los Cabos, Mexico. But when the arachnid made its way onto the shoulder of a male passenger, he flicked it off, sending it flying in the direction of the woman, on whose hand it landed, and proceeded to sting the shit out of her. Flight attendants successfully managed to kill the vile creature, and the flight took off just an hour behind schedule. The victim is reportedly doing A-OK and took the stinging like a champ. She has yet to release a statement, however, confirming whether or not she's had it with the mother***ing scorpions on mother***ing planes.
Bird's body breaks plane's nose breaks bird's life. A Turkish Airlines Boeing 737-800 was left with a bend in its beak after a bird strike. Luckily for the 125 passengers on board, flying from Istanbul to Nevşehir, the plane landed safely. Pictures of the airplane taken after landing shows considerable blood splatter as well as the impressive level of damage to the nose cone. Damage to the nose area of an airplane is common in most aeronautical impacts, but not fatal to the plane. Birds can strike the nose, wings, or hull without posing a risk to the plane and its passengers. But bird strikes to the engine area are more critical, as the U.S. Airways Flight 1549 reminded us all back in January 2009.
Entitled Flyers Fight grounds flight over knee defender. A United Airlines flight from Newark to Denver was diverted after 2 passengers got in a fight over entitlement to recline seats. A man in the middle of the 12th row on United Flight 1462 used this device called the knee defender to prevent the woman in front of him from reclining. The man wanted to use his laptop, which would have been difficult if the woman reclined. But with knee defender, you just lower your tray table, then place the tiny plastic chocks on the arms. Now you can use your laptop in peace and even recline while you do so if you wish. The flight attendant asked the man to remove the device, but he refused. They couldn't decide who was more entitled, him to use his laptop or her to recline her seat. Especially since they both paid for Economy Plus seating, meaning they already had 4 more inches of legroom than the other sardines packed into coach. The flight was diverted to Chicago after the woman threw a cup of water in the man's face. Then they were both kicked off the flight and the plane continued to Denver without them. The FAA has not banned the knee defender because it doesn't pose a specific safety risk. But they might change their tune after one angry passenger makes the flyer 1 row back swallow them whole. What's your take? Who do you think was in the right?
Airborne passenger cracks Miami-bound flight ceiling. There's turbulence. And then there's a kind of turbulence that quite literally sends passengers airborne, the latter of which being the variety experienced by those unfortunate enough to be aboard a recent American Airlines flight that saw 5 injured. Despite the fact that the seatbelt sign was on, passengers and even the pilots aboard Flight 982 had no idea what was in store for them as they made their way from Grenada to Miami Thursday morning. They were initially greeted by some slight rumbling, apparently without incident. When the turbulence came back to rear its ugly head, though, it struck one sleeping non-seatbelt wearing passenger with a vengeance. A sudden turbulence-induced plunge reportedly sent an unidentified man flying skyward so fast he smacked into the ceiling and broke one of the Airbus A319's top panels. Ouch! Luckily though, the man's cranium didn't properly puncture the aircraft, causing something like this to happen. Whew, close call. The plane eventually made a successful landing despite the bumpy ride, which apparently came courtesy of Hurricane Joaquin.
A Singapore Airlines flight recently caused a scare during breakfast when turbulence caused the plane to lose altitude and sent meal trays and a few passengers into the ceiling. The Boeing 777-300ER, carrying about 350 people, was on its way from Singapore to London as breakfast was being served. The plane began to experience turbulence and the captain ordered the attendants back to their seats.
Calm down! Get a hold of yourself!
Stewardess, please let me handle this.
But it only got worse as the plane dropped more than 100 feet. Unfastened meals and passengers went airborne and smacked up against the ceiling, causing quite a mess. Nobody was seriously hurt, and even if they didn't get breakfast, they got dessert, as flight staff handed out chocolates. A total of 11 passengers and 1 crew member sustained minor injuries in the incident and were attended to by medical staff upon arriving at the airport.
American Airlines Flight 2293 makes emergency landing after cabin walls crack. Passengers of an American Airlines flight were thrown into panic after the plane's cabin wall panels broke apart, fueling worries that the aircraft would disassemble mid-air. American Airlines Flight 2293 took off from San Francisco International Airport shortly before 1 p.m. on Monday. The Dallas-bound Boeing 757 was carrying 183 passengers and 6 crew members. Passengers became worried that the airplane would be torn apart as wall panels began to tear, revealing the aircraft's insulation materials. An hour into the flight, the pilot decided to return to San Francisco after learning of the broken panels. No one was injured in the incident. American Airlines said the cabin panels cracked because of a blown air duct, but that the aircraft did not experience any depressurization.
JetBlue flight makes emergency landing in California. A JetBlue flight carrying 147 people made an emergency landing at a California airport on Thursday after one of its engines blew out. Flight 1416 took off at approximately 9:15 a.m. with 142 passengers and 5 crew, headed for Austin, Texas. The Airbus A320 jet had climbed to an altitude of about 9,400 feet when its right engine blew. A signal alerted pilots that an engine was overheating, so they deployed extinguishers and began turning the plane around for an emergency landing. As the cabin filled with smoke, the oxygen masks did not drop down, so flight attendants went around and deployed them by hand. As the plane cruised back over land, the plane began to shake, and passengers broke into tears. After the pilots landed safely on the runway, everyone evacuated the plane using emergency slides. 4 people were injured when the flight returned to Long Beach Airport. 1 passenger was having difficulty breathing and sent to the hospital.
Singapore Airlines flight sucks baggage container into engine at Changi Airport. A Singapore Airlines Boeing 777 plane sucked in an empty baggage container into one of its engines at Singapore Changi Airport last week. Flight SQ421 had arrived in Singapore from Mumbai on the afternoon of December 19th. The plane was taxiing toward the gate when an LD3 container next to the jetway got sucked into one of its engines. Passengers were about to leave the plane to catch another flight when the accident happened. According to Singapore Airlines, no injury were reported on the ground or on board the plane. Police are currently investigating the incident.
Korean Airlines Vice President goes nuts over nuts. We're not entirely sure what drove Korean Airlines executive Hyun-ah Heather Cho nutso last Friday, but we do know it was enough for her to make the pilot take the plane back to the gate. Korea Airlines Flight 86 bound for Seoul was just pushing back from the gate at New York's JFK Airport. The flight attendants were passing out light snacks and beverages while the plane was taxiing. However, Cho didn't seem to like how the macadamia nuts she received were given to her. She marched directly to the flight's purser and asked him why they weren't served on a dish and why she wasn't given a choice in the first place. The purser couldn't give a straight answer, so she gave an order to return to the gate and booted him off the plane. Some on the net are siding with her saying, hey, what if someone had an allergy to the nuts? To which I'd say, just don't eat the damn things and ask for something else, you crybaby. By the way, Heather Cho's father, Cho Young-ho, who is also the president of the airline, just accepted her resignation according to the reports. Nepotism much? It's possible she may face criminal charges if aviation regulations were found to have been violated.
A group of some 100 high school students from Yeshiva of Flatbush and their chaperones were thrown off an AirTran flight because, according to the flight crew, they were too rowdy. The students, all seniors, were embarking on a trip to Atlanta from New York. Flight crews say they asked the students to sit down and turn off their mobile devices, but they didn't comply. They were reportedly so unruly that the pilot had to make an announcement, which the airline says is highly unusual. When the students still didn't comply, flight crew decided to throw them off the plane, a process the airline says delayed the flight by 45 minutes. Some students have taken to social media to complain about how they were treated. They're just lucky they weren't treated like this man.
Malaysia Airlines steward fondled passenger mid-flight. This has been a really bad year for Malaysia Airlines, and now sexual abuse allegations threaten to make things worse. Australian Laura Bushney said she was sexually assaulted by a crew member while flying on Malaysia Airlines flight MH20 from Kuala Lumpur to Paris earlier this month. Bushney said she told a male flight attendant that she was uncomfortable flying with the airline after the tragedies that befell flights MH370 and MH17 earlier this year. Chief Steward Maud Rossi bin Abkarim then offered to comfort her. Apparently, however, his idea of comforting was not what Bushney had in mind. The steward sat next to Bushney and started to massage her legs. Bushney claimed she could feel that he was physically aroused. Bushney said she became frozen with fear while Rossi's hand reached inside her pants and touched her private parts. After the ordeal, Rossi allegedly tried to calm her down, but Bushney says she just kept screaming, "I just want to get off this plane!" She was later moved to first class, where Rossi begged her not to take the matter further because he has a family. Bushney was furious. "You've got a wife at home and you did this to me? What's wrong with you? That's rape," she told him. When the plane landed in Paris, Bushney was escorted by French police to a station and questioned about the incident while Rossi was arrested. Malaysia Airlines told the media that the safety, comfort, and well-being of their passengers is their first priority, and that the airline will cooperate fully with French authorities as they investigate.
Dirty old man jailed for hitting on 15-year-old girl during flight. This 66-year-old California man named Hans Loudermilk has been jailed on charges he molested and sexually propositioned a 15-year-old girl while seated next to her on a Delta Airlines flight from LA to Salt Lake City on March 26. The sleazy senior spotted the child sitting alone and asked her to move to the middle seat. They began chatting innocently at first, but it quickly took a sexual turn as he began to stroke her chin. The girl says he said he could teach her about sex in the way a schoolboy couldn't. He began stroking her thigh and told her the pair could marry in Utah, the state they were landing in. As soon as the plane touched down, the girl found a TSA agent and told him of her ordeal. When the predator spotted the pair talking, he raced into a gift shop to change his shirt in the hope of getting away unmolested. Hans Loudermilk's Facebook page shows an apparently single man who photographs and makes off-color sexual comments about women he doesn't know. And it seems even his daughter is uncomfortable with his behavior. Hey Loudermilk, next time keep your hands to yourself.
Emergency landing after Delta pilot gets locked out of cockpit. Just before landing, the passengers on a 2.5-hour Delta Airlines flight from Minneapolis to Las Vegas received some terrifying news. The plane's captain, who took a quick bathroom break before the plane's final descent, was locked out of the cockpit. The door was jammed. These images, taken from a video shot by Curry Russell, a passenger on the plane, showed the pilot addressing the cabin, informing the passengers of the emergency landing. The first officer took control, and when the aircraft safely landed at McCarran International Airport at around 12:25 p.m., the plane's 168 passengers broke out in cheers of relief. Because the first officer's seat doesn't allow access to the plane's taxi controls, the aircraft had to be towed from the runway to the gate. No passengers or crew aboard were injured in the ordeal.
United flight to Denver turns around after crazed man rushes cockpit. These images show the moment several brave passengers took down a man who rushed the cockpit on an airborne flight Monday night. Shortly after takeoff, a man on United Flight 1074 reportedly ran down the aisle yelling "Jihad." The flight left Dulles Airport at 10:15 Monday night and was headed for Denver but returned to Dulles at 10:40. According to reports, the man rushed at the cockpit. Passengers tackled him to the floor before he could approach the door. Several passengers held him until the plane landed. In a cell phone video, the man can be heard apologizing while pinned to the floor.
I'm so sorry.
Law enforcement officials met the plane at the gate and transported the man to a nearby hospital. Officials have not yet identified the man, but other passengers refer to him as David in the video. A government official says the man has no known ties to terrorist organizations.
U.S. flight safe landing after slide malfunction. An evacuation slide was deployed mid-flight Sunday night, causing United Airlines Flight 1463 from Chicago's O'Hare Airport to Santa Ana's John Wayne Airport to be diverted to Mid-Continent Airport in Wichita. Passengers aboard heard a loud bang and a hiss as the emergency slide inflated. The Boeing 737-700 dropped from 38,000 feet at 10:05 p.m. to 11,000 feet 12 minutes later due to a loss in cabin pressure. All 96 passengers and 5 crew members on board were seated at the time of incident. No injuries were reported. Earlier reports that a passenger had attempted to open a door during the flight